The diagnosis was not good. The initial response was, this is inoperable. There's
Mm.
really nothing we can do except to treat you as a chronic cancer patient, and we'll try to get you as much time as possible.
Hey there, everybody. It's Matt. Welcome back to the podcast. Excited to be here again with you. Hope you have caught up on the previous episodes. We got a solo pod coming here in the near future. But today, I have brought you another guest. I told you I'd try to bring you the best ones that I possibly can. And so I'm doing that again today. I want to, we're gonna have a conversation here with a good friend of mine that's been actually a good friend of mine and Nina's for some time, way back into the early discipleship ministry days. If you guys are familiar with our past and in discipleship ministry, you guys will obviously recognize him because he's all over the place in that world. Has been for a long time and has his own ministry now. Does or that for a long time that dealt with theater and in the arts and Christian arts and things like that. So I won't give too much away here at the beginning. Well, we'll just dive into it. But I want to welcome and introduce somebody who's actually in my home state of Florida. I'm out here on the West Coast, and he went back East Coast. I want to introduce all of y'all to Mr. Brian Sylvia. Brian, welcome.
Woo! Thank you. Thank you. Good
Yep.
to be here.
A theater guy brought his own support applause track. Yeah, there you go. He woohooed himself. That's awesome. Well, Brian, you want to give everybody just a I don't know 2-minute little introduction about who you are, where you're at, kind of whatever you feel is relevant to kind of kick us off here.
Sure. I'm originally from New England. I'm from Massachusetts. Huge Boston everything fan.
Oh, dang it.
You know what?
I forgot.
For you, I had a Celtic shirt on today. I'm like, let me
Yeah.
change it because this is going to go sideways if I do.
Thank you.
And pretty excited about March Madness starting and UConn being the #1 seed overall. So that's cool. But that's where I started life in ministry, my schooling, all of that. Been in ministry over 40 years, doing a lot of different things. Like you said, the bulk of those years in discipleship ministry and Christian theater. I was kind of involved in that when it was still a taboo sort of thing. So I've watched the evolution of that, and it's been cool to be kind of on the inside track of what God's doing in that world. And I'm a writer, comedy script writer. So about 12 of my scripts are out there being done by churches and schools and
Nice.
Community theaters, and so I've got that world. And right now, I serve as a chaplain at a senior living community. So yeah. And
wow,
I am married. My wife, Rebecca, is actually a school teacher. She's a Spanish teacher. My daughter, one daughter, her name is Annalise. She's 19, and she is a sophomore in college.
Nice. Man, when you talked about how long you've been in ministry and how the Christian theater used to be taboo, it kind of made me think about just how far we've come, right? Because I'm born and raised in the South, probably an hour north, or an hour or two north of where you are right now. And I remember the fight of wanting to sing a special song and bring a drum set in to the church. And it was, those things are the devil, take out that devil music from the church. And so now we got, we've come full circle to where almost anything goes, right? So
yeah,
that's got to be, it's got to be a pretty wide turn, right? Because especially just from the time and how the culture changes, but also if you started in discipleship ministry, which is almost all younger folks, and then now to where you're a chaplain in a senior living center, is there any similarities between the two, or is there anything that you're finding just as people's needs are between the ages? It doesn't matter about the age. Is there any similarity between those two places that you're finding?
Yeah, there are common denominators. Absolutely. Um, when the bulk of your ministry is spent in with a younger generation, and then there is a sudden shift, and I'm working with folks that are in their 80s and 90s, but still discipleship is at the core of what I do.
Mm,
So though I conduct services and Bible studies and religious activities on our campus, and it's a very large and population, and very, very affluent population.
mm,
But I still find myself seeing the same needs, the same cries of their heart. It's just that their stage of life is different. Most of these people have been steeped in their own high religion. And so when you start talking about discipleship and relationship with Christ, those are foreign terms. And when you spend the majority of your ministry, most of those 40 years in church ministry, we have our own lingo, and so we get very, very used to our evangelical terminology, our subcultures
yep.
talk, and then you get to a different venue and realize there are words I'm using that they have no context for, and then there are things that they believe that I have to kind of walk them through the word and go, hey, this isn't actually in there. Did you know that? And
Mm,
so it's an interesting journey, but I've been there a year and a half, so I'm just now getting to where I have the credibility that there's a stronger lean in to what I'm doing, and so they have a little bit more, I guess, respect. Is funny because, as I told you just before we started this, as of 2 weeks from now, I'm on Medicare. So
right.
I'm like, hey, I'm entering a new phase of my life. But at the same time, I'm the age of the children of the people that I
Mm,
do ministry to. So they look at me like the young guy. I'm the kid that comes in, and so when I try to share something, I have this, and some of these people have been insanely successful financially in the business world, and so it's a little unnerving, intimidating, to some degree, but I also lean on the 40 years of doing this and the road that God's taken me on. I have my mug today just says journey, and that's kind of what it's all about.
Everybody likes free stuff. Well, I got two free resources for you that are available right now. They're both ebooks, and the first one is called Breaking Mediocre. In it, I deal with 6 things that keep men's lives mediocre and what we can do about them. This is a great tool for some personal development, or even if you're leading a group of men who want to keep each other accountable for personal growth. There's a lot of great tools and resources in this ebook that will assist you through that process. The second book is called One Decision. I am over 45 and recently completed the 75 Hard Challenge. And I've had some people ask me about my regimen that included my diet, my schedule, my exercise routine that I kept during that 75 days. And so I put it together as a free resource for you as well. It's complete with a schedule. It's complete with the food plan that I chose, some tips on how to motivate yourself in the middle of those 75 days. And it even has links in there for things that you can buy of products that I used as well. Both of these resources are free and available for you right now. Just go to the link in the description of this video and download them. You just put in your email and they'll send you a copy of the ebook. Now, let's go back to the podcast.
When I was younger, which was not as long ago as it was for you, but when we were
Thanks for that.
when we, I love you, man. When we were younger, when you heard someone say the words, I'm called to ministry, they typically meant I was going to enter the career path of the church. Like I would start it, if you had like volunteering or middle school and work your way up to young adults or, youth and young adults and associate pastors. And so you got your own church and all that kind of stuff. But I don't know about you, but I'm finding that the lingo and the perception for especially this generation we're dealing with now, almost none of them, at least the people that I'm running into here, really have that as a life goal. The majority of the people in the church, when they're like, oh yeah, I want to do ministry, have that as a life goal. And now I'm finding and actually encouraging people, don't come down this church route if that's not exactly 100% what the Lord's directing you to do. Don't assume that's what it means. And so you're kind of embodying that, right? Like you have spent a long time, decades inside the church, and now you're out of a church context and doing the work of a pastor and an evangelist and a discipler, all in a place that would be if we looked at our our old school selves, it would be considered unconventional,
Mhm.
right? Can you talk about how that has been different for you, or maybe the same?
It's been different and the same, all at the same time. I I what I do now is so much more fresh.
Mm,
I don't feel like there are churchy expectations on me.
mm,
We don't talk about attendance numbers. We don't talk about offerings. We don't talk about the things that drive church business,
mm.
church business meetings. I've sat in many a staff meeting as a church staff member where the bulk of our time is not talking about the word of God or what God's doing in our lives, but the business of the ministry. I don't have I cut through all that. And so my time on my job or on my ministry is a lot more grassroots. I mean, I'm just taking people on their journey with Jesus, and so I don't worry about that now. I see things on social media about all of that, and I think, man, it's not been that long, but it's so foreign to me already
Mm.
that ministry seems so much more precious, that this is what I wanted to do all along. When you do discipleship ministry, you just want to pour into lives. And I'm just looking at faces that are a little more seasoned, shall we say. but
Hmm. Yeah.
and so that common thread is still there, but I don't deal with um the talk of the subculture of church. So that's refreshing, actually.
Yeah, in one of our previous podcasts, I think it was with Roderick Thomas. He's a football coach and was involved in spent years and still does, hip hop music. And he's like, I've just taken all the things that I've learned from the church, I've taken them outside of the church, and now I'm going to pour these things into the people who are lost and need the development the most. And so I think what that's doing, and I mean, I'd like to hear your thoughts on this. I think it's kind of redefining, hopefully long term, what believers and the world sees as a pastor. Because right now, a pastor's got to be the guy who's upfront, speaking all the time. He's got to be perfect at marketing and social media and
Yeah.
and relevancy and addressing issues, but not ticking people off. And he's got to walk that perfect fine balance between everything. He's got to be creative but studied, learned but not rigid. He's got to be, a business person and a leader and a follower and a shepherd and a sheep at the same time. It's like this impossible, expectation on any one human being. And what I'm hearing you talk about is the work of a shepherd. It's you caring for people, caring for believers, and going after unbelievers,
Mhm.
and really doing the work of a shepherd. You think that's changing a little bit, or is it just kind of something we're like, hey, I'm kind of shedding this, I'm walking out of it because of, one thing or another, and I've found this freedom? Or do you think that's changing in kind of the church world as a whole?
Oh, I think it's changing in the church world as a whole. You hear the term deconstruct going,
Sure.
all over the place, and I think that that term, it can be both positive and negative. People deconstruct for the wrong reason, and they're on the wrong journey.
Sure.
But to rethink what we do in order to make sure we're framing it within biblical context, that's always a positive thing. So we can deconstruct as long as we're in the process of reconstructing our faith in a manner that's strong. And so I think that's happening everywhere. Everybody's thinking about what church should be or shouldn't be, what elements aren't as important as we thought they were. And hopefully people are getting back to a more solid biblical template in what they do and how they think and process church. For me, most of these people think of, hey, I'm good because I went to church for all these years. I
Hmm.
don't know what happened in those times. I just attended these meetings. And when they hear me teach things from the word, I'm getting so many questions. And when you get a question from a 94-year-old individual,
Sure.
man, it spins you around to know that they really want to know what the Word of God has to say on a subject. So, and to know that they were a part of every Sunday and possibly a midweek for decades, took their families, did all of that, but missed some very basic information. So yeah, I think there's a positive side to the reconstruction for some people.
Yeah, your reference to deconstruction, I think deconstruction has happened for ages. We just didn't
Yeah,
have a nice old trendy word for it, right? Like, even when I kind of left the confines of my, my kind of small worldview in the church I was raised in, and moved out of Florida and here, and and started to look at some of the things and going, wait a minute, this, I've been told, these catchphrases or these,
yeah,
statements that state, or these one-liners, for so long, that when I go to the Bible, I'm like, it's not really what that says. And so there's a lot of us who've kind of unwrapped the things that has been presented us through tradition, and then, but with not with the idea of I have a favorite sin and need to justify it and abandon this faith so I can go live in that sin, right?
right.
But in a way to come to a more pure sense of truth and the faith that would line up with a biblical worldview. I think that's yeah, I think you're spot on with that.
Well, you
Um,
you you said something. You used the term one-liners, and man, that's a great term to use. We get so used to our one-liners,
mhm,
and then you step out of a denominational setting or out of just a general evangelical setting, and you step into a world of primarily non-evangelicals,
yeah,
and you better rethink how you're stating things, because those one-liners, they're gibberish to them, and they seem contrived
mm,
to a lot of people, and because they've seen, or should I say, they've heard those one-liners in venues that they don't respect, whether
mm,
it be from a televangelist or whatever. And so you have to be really careful how you use what phrases you use, uh, because though we may be used to them in our world, they may have a negative connotation to folks
mm.
outside of our, like you said, our small world.
Yeah, I heard a guy once talk about how he wasn't concerned. He's a biblical scholar. He said, "I'm not concerned with anyone being able to recite scripture verbatim. I am concerned with, do you understand what it means and are you living it? And when he said the first part of that statement, I wanted to just scream heresy, right? Because I've been involved in competitions at church. You know what I mean? Like,
Yeah.
what's this verse, or how many can I string along without missing a word? And like, I was judged on, like, we literally had, game show style competitions
Oh
on,
yeah.
but I quote them word for word, and no one cared if I understood what I was saying, even because it was in the old King James. You know what I mean? Like, no one understood, cared if I could, discern what it meant or the principle behind it, or if I was living it. They just wanted me to pop off the reciting of it. And so when I heard him say that, I went, "Oh shoot, I can memorize it all I want." You know what I mean? But
Yeah.
if I don't understand the principle of it and how to apply it and how to explain that to somebody else, oh man, it changed the game for me.
Well, I deal with people who come again from a high church kind. If they have a religious background, it's not what my faith journey was, and so they're used to, we say the Apostles' Creed every week
Uh,
in church, and so I took the time to start um, going through the Apostles' Creed phrase by phrase, talking about its history, why it was written, who it was written by, as best we can tell, and it was fascinating to them because there were phrases that they said again for decades that they had no clue what it meant.
mm,
So trying to get them to see doing something with the best of intentions, for as long as you've done them, really has no life-giving application. So to teach them the why behind it all has been eye-opening.
yeah, that it also points to uh, a deep-seated belief that they may not be articulating, right? Because if they just went and they just participated and brought my kids, as what you're supposed to do in a Americanized concept, in a church concept or whatever. I recite these things, I say these words, I answered the altar call, I prayed the prayer. I mean, does that mean I get the food after the service? Number one. And number two is like, yeah, I don't think I'm back here again. I'm good, right? Like, I can just go live my life. And I think it kind of points to a larger problem of what the real foundational belief is. Like, if I just, if I hit the pew, drop a little money on the plate, and I'm good, right? No, that's not the equivalent of this. If I'm after attendance, then possibly, like you talked about before, like the discussions are more on the business end. I could probably kind of, ease up on the conviction stuff because you're here and, oh, you're doing the right thing and da da da. But after a while, when you start to explain what's really behind that and exposes the lack of knowledge or the incorrect frame of belief, it can really be jarring for people. I'm
Yeah,
especially who have lived their whole life that way.
yeah.
So we could sit here and talk about ministry the whole time, right? Like, we could pick it apart and solve the world's problems here in the next, half
Yeah,
hour or so. Um, but I want to typically, kind of who we're after and our audience on this podcast is typically men, typically guys who are married, have kids, or about to be married, or kind of in whatever that range would be. I know the numbers might throw people up, but that's kind of the life that they're in, looking for career, looking for job, making a change and stuff like that. And so we talk a lot about stuff relating to, husbands, fatherhood, leadership, leading your family, being a person who's following Christ and trying to lead your family down that route as well. And one of the reasons we do that is not because the toxic masculinity is a trending thing on Twitter or whatever nowadays. And for those of you who don't know, one of the reasons we do that is because when a father is the leader of his family coming to church, over 90% of the time, those kids wind up being believers and active members of that faith community. When he's not, and it's led by the mother, it's less than 26%, if I remember the statistics right. And it's not, I'm not discounting the role of the mother. That's not at all. But in this specific instance, that leadership of the father is wildly pivotal. And there's other instances as well, but that's one of the reasons that we kind of discuss these things. So, um, I could sit and take several instances from your life, right? Like, I know it, and we've spent time together, and you've been here and I've been there, to wherever there was, even if it was that godforsaken Boston area that you wanted me to be in. But there's one that I'd like to draw our attention to, because I think it can, the principles of it have a ripple effect to a lot of the people who are listening. You had kind of a health scare, not too long ago, right?
Mhm.
Within the last 10 years,
Mhm.
that um, kind of started to bring some opportunities to react in a way that would reflect God or not. And I'd like to talk about a couple of those instances about how you handled it. But can you kind of give everybody just a quick little synopsis of what happened and what that health issue was?
Yeah. In 2018, in May of 2018, I was diagnosed with stage 3 prostate cancer.
Mm,
Actually, stage 3B. And I, um, I had been going to the doctor, to the urologist, for probably about 9 months, and they were treating. Uh, they had me on a treatment without ever really doing a biopsy. Then finally, they're like, "This is a little more involved than we initially thought. Let's do a biopsy." And the biopsy was nothing short of terrifying.
mm,
I I did the biopsy, not the procedure itself, but going back and getting the results. My doctor was not in when I got the results, so I had a PA in the office give me the results, a person I had never even met, and I had been working with my doctor for, like I said, about 9 months. The diagnosis was not good. The initial response was, "This is inoperable. There's
mm.
really nothing we can do except to treat you as a chronic cancer patient, and we'll try to get you as much time as possible."
Jeez.
And the room was silent. And my wife and I are holding hands, and neither of us knowing what to say in that instance. And so I said, "Okay, well, is there any shot of beating this?" And he said, "Well, I'm going to send you to an oncologist, and that's the best I have right now." And we drove an hour and a quarter back home, silent. I could hear my wife kind of sniffling in the passenger seat as we're trying to process all this. What in the world does this mean? Um, and I got home, and the first thing that I did when I walked in the door, there sat my then 13-year-old daughter, and I explained to her that I was just diagnosed with cancer. She knew that that was a possibility because I had my biopsy. I didn't hide it from her. She was a part of praying the whole journey, and so um, we waited for a few days. And when my doctor got back from vacation, he called me, and he said, "Okay, before you go down this super negative path, there's a whole lot of tests we have not done. So we're going to
Mm,
get you scheduled for those." I had a friend in church who was a doctor, and so got me hooked up really quickly with all of the tests that I needed. And as a matter of fact, as I'm doing those tests, we were rehearsing for this big dramatic thing, the theatrical thing we were doing in the church. And so I went and got my port installed, for all the nuclear stuff they were
oh,
pumping
wow.
me, and then ran back to the church, conducted a rehearsal with that port hanging out of my arm, kind of freaking people out. And I'm like, "No, no, I'm not going to let this be my focus right now. Let's do what we've
Mm,
got to do. I'm not stopping what we had doing." And went back and had the test. But in that process, I looked at my 13-year-old daughter and said, "Hey, I need you to pray that those scans, all of these tests, come back clean." And so I spent several days back to back doing these tests, and then a week later go back to get the results, and my doctor came busting in the room and said, "Good news, your scans are clean. Your cancer seems to be isolated," which is a shock to us because
Hmm.
the way it looked, it was not good. And he said, "So we're going to get you into surgery as quickly as we can." So I got home, I walked in the door and said, and my daughter's right there in her spot on the couch waiting. And I said, "Baby, my scans were clean." And I was like, "Yeah." And she looked at me and said, "Cool." I said, "That's all I get, I get cool. That's it." And she said, "Well, you told me to pray." And so I prayed.
Hmm.
And I kind of stopped. I'm getting choked up now, but I stopped and went, "Man, she just schooled me in in
Yeah.
my own faith." But to look in the eyes of your child and know they got it, like the years of sitting in services and rehearsals and discipleship talks, all of that, she heard it, she processed it, she watched it, and it wasn't a negative thing for her, but it was a, "Hey, this is real." And I prayed, and so now what do we do?
Hmm.
So yeah, that's the backdrop.
Man, there's a lot I'd love to touch on there. I don't know if we'll have time for all of it, but um, let's talk about first, as a father, that last thing you said. All those years of sitting in church, all those years of the discipleship talks, all those years of her going with us to the ministry and sitting in these places and all that stuff. All the years of that, she now has an opportunity to put all of that in practice.
Mhm.
Um, I in the last several years, as we've kind of um, been leading and really starting Roots Community Church here in Phoenix. I run into people sometimes who are like, "My kids doing X, Y, and Z, or they're out of control, or whatever." And they're probably the less mature version of Matt would be like, "Well, here's what you do. Step one, let's do this. Let's do that."
Right.
And after living through some of that stuff on my own and watching other people go through it, um, the importance of that old story about putting the big things in first really is the truth about, I'm sure you've heard that story where the professor comes in and puts big
Yeah.
rocks in a jar and says, "Is it
My
full?"
wife would do that teaching every year with our students,
Nice.
every year.
Nice. If you don't know it and you're watching, it's real simple. A professor put a bunch of big rocks in a jar, put a lid on it, and says, "Is it full?" And all his students said yes. And he opened it back up and poured, pebbles in it and filled in some of the spaces. Says, "Is it full now?" They said yes. And he poured sand in it, and then it worked down through the little cracks. And then he says, "Is it full now?" Everyone's like yes. And he pours water in it, and then it kind of fills in the rest of it. And he says, "Now it's full. What did you learn from this?" And the reaction is almost always, "Well, you can put more in, you can do more than you realize, there's more capacity than you think." And he said, "Well, that might be true." He's like, "But the reality is you need to put the big things in first." And so what you did on the front end with your daughter was put the big things in first. She's sitting there listening all those years. It's basically the parable of the sower, right? Like you're pouring seed into someone. And I think as opposed to, I think as fathers, especially because we're inclined as men to want to fix it, right? Like the thing is broke, I'll go fix it, or I know a guy, or I'll take it to a shop and they'll fix it, whatever. But since we're that way by nature, it can be hard for us to just say, "I'm going to continually, consistently do the right thing and bring her to church, bring her to these services, and let the seeds of all these things take root in her, and then watch how it develops later." In your early years of fatherhood, was that ever a challenge for you? Did you ever wonder, man, is this taking? Or are there moments where you're like, "Oh man, Are we just, going through the motions here? Is this really doing something for her before that moment where you saw it kind of come to life?
Um, I, every now and again, but for those of you that are listening to this and doing the math and going, wait a minute, he's how old and his daughter's how old? I was 40, I was 45 years old when my daughter was born, and so surprise. Um, and so I brought a different
Mm,
a different vantage point to the table, um, and to be 45 years old and hold your infant daughter in your hand. And being on the journey that my wife and I had been on, trying to have children, there was that, hey, we have to make this special. Everything is special with her. She's about to move away to college, in the fall, and she's doing online college now. But we're like, oh man, we want it for her. We're thrilled that she has very much on her own said, no, I want to go to a Christian university with a Christian worldview to study communication. So we're thankful for that. But I think for me, I wanted her to trust me and my walk. I wanted her
mm,
to look at my walk with Christ and go, it has value for my dad, so it will have value for me.
mm.
Um, I had a dad. I lost my dad when I was 18 years old. Um, he died suddenly in surgery, and
Wow.
and I was 3 weeks away from graduating high school. And so my world flipped upside down, and my dad and I were really good friends, and so to suddenly lose him, and he wasn't there for my high school graduation, my college graduation,
Mhm.
my wedding, none of those monumental occasions. And so I think I brought a different viewpoint to my own fatherhood. I understood the value of having a good dad who, and he, when he came to know Christ, his life was completely spun around, and I watched his authentic walk with Jesus.
Mm.
And I think that's what I wanted most for my daughter to see.
All right. Young
Even above all,
fathers. Oh, go ahead. Well, yeah, sorry to cut you off there. If you're a young father or any father of any of age, I want you to take the wisdom that was just dropped there for you and apply it to your life. Your children watching you have an authentic, out loud relationship with God, um, is of prime importance to them, more so than the go memorize the scripture or do these things or dropping off a youth group. All of those things are planting seeds. But one of the things you just heard him say, as someone who had a little more wisdom than the rest of us, I was you were 45 when you became a father. I was 25, right? So there's, you're struggling and you want to, at the beginning, especially when you're young, I want to do all these things, and I want to make this impact and put these things in place and all that kind of stuff. What your child needs to see you do is live out what you said that you believed. And that is going to have a ripple effect in them, because here he is, understanding the value of a good father, doing the best of his ability to be that good father, live that faith in front of her. And then on top of that, all those seeds of those messages are poured into her. And then at 13, um, she looks at him and says, well, of course it worked. I prayed, right? Of course, this is going to be a good thing. I prayed just like I was taught to, just like I was shown to, just like and then now I'm putting all that into practice and seeing that work. So, dads, gold nugget right here for you. You have to live out publicly your faith in front of the kids. And I would also probably add to that, don't fake it. If you have a question, say you got a question. If you're struggling because, man, I'm a believer, and then I'm going here and I have cancer and I have a 13-year-old daughter and they're telling me it's inoperable and all this kind of stuff. How do I react to that? You know what I mean? Like, well, it's the Lord's got it. You know what I mean? That whole like cheesy, overdone. Do you really feel that way? Or is there anything in you that goes, oh crap, man, if this doesn't go well, man, I don't have a lot of time with my daughter. And you start thinking about that stuff down the line. I think that'll be a normal reaction. But he just dropped a gold nugget for you for fatherhood. You have to live that faith out in front of them, because that's going to make a massive impact on them.
Yeah, absolutely.
So you tell her, I want to go back to earlier in the story. You tell her to pray. You have a silent ride home. And your reaction right there is real important, I think. I think the way you react, what's going through your head there when you're holding your wife's hand, you're kind of getting the worst case scenario of news. There's no, you can't operate on it. I have to get in a car with her and listen to her cry and go back, and I don't have an answer. There's no answer. As a priest, provider, protector, all those things at that moment are not called into question, but are challenged, and you got to find a way to lead from those aspects, biblically. What do you do? I know it's not how you're processing. I'm kind of framing it in a discussion format, but what do you do at that moment to make sure my wife and my daughter are good? I'm displaying my faith. I'm going to keep my faith in the Lord. How does that whole process go from that point forward?
All of those titles, first of all, disappear, and you feel extremely mortal. Your mortality is right here, and there's no escaping it. And all you can think about is, I want to make sure I have the time. Man, messing me up here. I want to make sure I have the time to experience in her life what my dad did not experience in mine. Because of what I went through. And so to say that there weren't some dark moments in those first, especially the first few days, man. I talked to a buddy of mine who had been through cancer as well, and we grew up in youth group together. He's on staff at a church in San Diego, and we connected. And he's like, man, you know what you're going to have to really watch is the mind monsters. The thoughts that take you down these roads that you don't you don't even know that that's where you're going to go, but the enemy wants to pull you down these roads that are really pretend roads at that point. And so I had to put aside the reverend title. Okay, I'm not an ordained minister right now. I'm just a guy diagnosed with cancer who wants to live for my family, with my family, but I am also confident that God will walk with me in this journey, whatever it looks like. And so you have all of these conflicting emotions that they all kind of appear all at once, and they waft down slowly, and you have to kind of put them in their right places. And the journey is ongoing. Once you're diagnosed with cancer, it's kind of always there. I had surgery. It was, I'm like, yay, we're good. 2.5 years later, they're like, whoops, there's a blip in your blood work. And then I did 8 weeks of radiation, and that was 2.5 years ago. And last blood work, they're like, whoops, there's something right there. It's very, very minimal, and we're not concerned with it. But nevertheless, there is that moment that it drops in your head, that what do we do now? And so it's the constant walk, and it's a daily walk. that my faith has to precede me through all of this. I don't know what people do without Jesus.
Yeah.
I mean, I see what people do without Jesus in times like this, but yeah, I don't know if that answers your question. I kind of,
Yeah. Yeah. No, no. I think that you probably, I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, you probably on the hour and a half drive home or whatever, um, you probably have all kinds of creative thoughts, should we call them? Like you're creating possibilities that don't exist and you're trying to, I do business analysis for my job. So I already have a kind of a tendency to operate this way and overthink anyway. But I think that that would drive you to that spot, especially as a creative person. Did you find yourself, then driving home or even later on where you're the mind monsters? Is that what you mean? Is like you're creating scenarios that don't exist and playing them out kind of emotionally?
oh yeah, my side gig is writing. Like I said,
Right.
I'm constantly creating scenarios and characters and worlds. And so to find my own world was an interesting journey. Where am I going to land in this? What's
Right.
the, you know, what's the act two going to look like here? Um, and I want to be out for the curtain call, so to speak. So,
Sure.
yeah, no, without a doubt, my wife, and I didn't hide that struggle from my family. It's not like I went into, I wasn't trying to be Superman. Um,
Right.
you know, they know my humanity and my struggle through that time, but my fight to put my faith out in front, um, to dig deeper into the Word, to stay more connected with Jesus and not less.
So, man, you said a whole mouthful right there. I want to draw everybody's attention, if you're watching this, to what he said about making sure that. Oh, I just lost it. It was so good. There's something, my mind's going so many different areas because you said such a mouthful. But oh, that's what I wanted to say. Your family knows you're not Superman. No matter how much you front, no matter how much the puffiness comes out in
Yeah,
an argument, or that didn't hurt, or whatever the thing is, your family understands your humanity. So you would do yourself a really big favor to drop the act and
the
understand you're
facade.
dealing.
Yeah,
Yes. Drop the facade and realize you're dealing with people who really know you. Presenting as the priest, protector, provider can kind of become titles, right? Like, well, I got to do all these things. Throw that off for a second and realize they understand that that's your role, but they also understand the limits of your humanity. I think that's another nugget, that I just caught right there. What do you do, like on a practical level, to deal with the quote unquote mind monsters? What do you do to kind of squash all that stuff like that your friend mentioned to you?
um, I watch my intake. Um, if you lean toward the negative, understand where your lean is, and most of it in a time like that, you can't help but lean to the negative. So you have to fight to lean the other direction. And so to find whatever it is, and this is going to sound really stupid, but what I did was every day I would end the day by watching a sitcom from my childhood.
Mm,
Uh, Brady Bunch, for instance. I would put on a stupid Brady Bunch episode that is mindless, but it would take me back to a time where I didn't have any worries. Life was
mm,
good. And it would kind of help me reframe, hey, life can be good. it's all right. And then that would kind of chill me out. And I'd watch it a lot of times with my kid by my side. And so just helping me to, again, reframe, refocus on life. Life can be complicated, but it's had its really, really peaceful moments. So let's settle into one of those.
Another gold nugget you just dropped right there for people to pick up. I hope you're understanding. You need to pull out your notes on your phone or write this down. If you are old school and have sticky notes like I used to, or if you've got a phone, write it down. Monitor your intake. You got to be careful what's going inside of you. You have to be careful what you're letting influence your mind and influence that lean. And then, so that's number one, is monitoring your intake. And the second thing, if I could summarize what you said, is self-awareness. You got to be honest about, do I lean positive or do I lean negative? And if you lean positive, understand you're going to be pulled in that negative mind frame when you're dealing with what they called the mind monsters. And then if you already lean negative, it's going to push you even further underwater, so to speak, because of the things because that creativity and that thoughts, those thoughts that are running off in your head. So monitor your intake and make sure you're self-aware enough to know where you are. And then you have to implement something in your life. He just gave you a practical example of, like a, lighthearted, mindless sitcom that he watched as a kid, to try to counteract some of that emotional pull to go underwater. Because once you sink under there, we're not talking about baptism where you're here. We're talking
Yeah.
about you having your head shoved underwater from an emotional standpoint, and it doing real damage to you, because all of a sudden you start, I don't know if I really want to breathe anymore. I don't know if I want to go through what could potentially be in front of you. So 3 great nuggets he just dropped right there that I want you to grab. So you are in this spot, you're dealing with the mind monsters, you're dealing, I'm trying to create a happy scenario for me at the end of every day. I'm watching this with my daughter. I'm trying not to let myself go down those roads very far that are kind of being presented to me, and those opportunities. And then you get the news of hey, there's more tests that we can do. How long was it before you got that information and then you could start doing those tests?
I received my diagnosis on a Friday. I went 5 days before hearing from my doctor and saying we can do more tests. The test started 2 days after that, so probably a week. But the time between the test results and the surgery was 6 weeks.
Oy.
And so those 6 weeks seemed like 6 months,
Sure.
because I was anxious to, hey, I want this cancer out of me. And it was a hellacious journey, but I want it out of me. And that was the time that I had to do a lot of that processing, because those mind monsters come right back and go, you know what, they're going to get in there and they're going to find out it's something else. This is, and then it's at that point they have to test lymph nodes and all of that. They're going to find some other things, and
Right.
And thank God all of those tests came negative. So, but yeah, you have to walk through those times strategically, intentionally, because my nightly ritual would be, let me watch a crime drama. Well, I don't need to be watching something that's highly stressful when I'm dealing with high stress. I don't need somebody else's stress to add to my own. And whether or not we think that influences our thought patterns, hey, I came to realize really quickly that it does. So, yeah.
So how is it in those moments waiting for the results? We've talked about your daughter. How's that relationship with your wife? What are those times like? Is it hopeful? Is it stressful for her? Is it, what do you what's the read that you're getting during that time?
Dude, the first thing you realize is that she is as affected by my cancer as I am.
Mm,
And, though we are tempted to go, hey, but the cancer's in my body. Um, I'm the one with the pain. I'm the one, being cut open. Um,
right.
we're a team in life, and don't underestimate how much your spouse is affected by your trial. And because it's our trial, it's ours. And and the recovery process, I don't know what I would have done without her. And we lived in a little tiny house at that time, and it was so funny. I had to get up and walk all the time. They were like, you have to stay, yeah, get up, and it hurt, and it was not fun. But we would scoot around the house, and we'd do stupid things, and we'd be cracking jokes, doing whatever we could to keep things as light as possible.
Hmm.
Because there's no denying this is not fun. This hurts. This is a really a tough time in life, but we kind of fought to keep it as light as we could. So
Man, you just be dropping gems today. I hope you caught what he said there. Don't underestimate the impact that your trial has on your spouse,
mhm.
because you can give in to the mind monster. You can get in the pit and think, well, no one else is dealing with this. It's just me. And that is not true. There are the people that love you and care about you, that you have teamed up with, your children, your friends. They are impacted in some way. There is a ripple effect from your diagnosis. Yes, the pain is kind of maybe isolated physically in you, but the thoughts that they have to deal with are just as real. They may not be as in depth as yours, because you're kind of worried about things, especially as being a guy. But if you are somebody who is going through a trial, doesn't matter if it's a health thing, doesn't matter if it's a job loss, doesn't matter if it's a business, time where business is unstable, or betrayals in your life or something like that. Those things are having impacts on all the people around you as well. Man, again, I could sit here and, I mean, I just love this. I could talk to you for forever, but we'll kind of land it there, and we'll do another one in the future if you're up for it,
Cool.
or if you'd like to. But so we're gonna wrap it up. But before we do, I'll leave you the floor. Just anything that you want to say, can be to just anybody in general, could be men, husbands, fathers, anybody at all, that you could leave them with something before we call it.
Well, we've concentrated on what happens if you are the one
Hmm.
diagnosed, if you are the one walking through the dark time. But what if it's your spouse? And
Mm.
we're kind of in that season now, where we've had a whoops, hey, what's happening? So now that it's kind of turnaround. And so listen, listen to their stories, listen to their stress, listen to it, and like lean into it, not just listen to words, but lean into the conversation the same way you want to be listened to. um, and I'm so thankful that my wife didn't just listen to words coming out of my mouth, but she
Right.
heard the heart. I mean, this year's 30 years of being married. So
Mm.
yeah, there's we've learned to really lean into those conversations. So I would say, you know, don't just think about you when your spouse is sharing something they're going through, but lean into their moment. Yeah.
Listen and lean in. He ends it with the home run. Ends it with a home run. Well, thank you very much for your vulnerability, for the honesty, for kind of sharing. Again, we may talk about like a loose framework, or hey, I might bring this up beforehand, but it's really just a conversation that we're having, that we're recording, everybody else gets to listen to. So thank you for being willing, number one, to do this, but also being vulnerable, because that's a characteristic, hopefully, that people are picking up by osmosis for all these conversations that we're having. So appreciate you, my friend.
Cool. Same here. Thanks. It's been an honor.
Well, all right. We're going to wrap it up this time, but I want to thank you guys for tuning in. If you got something, if there's a nugget of truth that you found from this that I didn't mention or highlighted, or something that jumped out to you, drop in the comments of the video, and you guys can go to town down there having some discussion. I'll be down there responding to you, and let's keep the conversation going long past the video. Appreciate you guys, and I'll catch you in the next one. See ya.